Strange New World, Season 2, Episode 8. He's a doctor, not a butcher. Right? Hey, it is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you here from the heart of Trekland through Trekland Treks, letting the dust settle just a little bit on all these recent Trek episodes. So, you know, instead of a hot take or a quick take, you get a second opinion from Dr. Trek. Hey, look, I have been writing, authoring, interviewing, archiving, hosting, dot connecting, punditing, and well, yeah, fanning Star Trek for a long time now. And boy, I've just got to say, woof, under the Cloak of War this week. And you know, as the old military theme folk song lyrics go, suicide is painless and it brings on many changes. Yeah. Most of all, congratulations, Davy Perez. You got to write an episode of MASH. Or at least that's what I thought for the first half hour or so of this episode. Wow. And then I hear the Butcher of Jagal, and I think the Butcher of Galatep. And my mind goes right to, well, Duet, and Nor the Battle to the Strong, and the Siege of AR-558. It's got the darkest of the DS9 Dominion War stories, but all through Star Trek, even the ambiguous ending that we're going to talk about, I go right back to Private Little War for the beginning, original series, and then, of course, In the Pale Moonlight. Can Mbenga deal with it? Can he deal with it? And even a tense diplomatic dinner, all the way from Khan and Space Seed, all the way to the undiscovered country with the Klingons in Star Trek VI. So much evoked with this episode that I was not expecting, and I am there for all of it. In fact, this episode begins at the Prospero system. And if you go back to Shakespeare's The Tempest, I mean, that was a little red flag to me. And you think about it. Prospero was a duke who neglected his politics. His brother betrayed him, ousted him, stuck him out on a desert island. He manipulated people. He eventually gets over his past and is able to let go of it. And it seems like that's a subtext for all the major characters in this episode, dealing with their past and letting go of it somehow or not. And oh, kudos, I mentioned writer Davy Perez, who's got solo credit here. Now, he's co-executive producer on Strange New Worlds. He came over from Supernatural, where he rose to producer level. He had 52 credits over there. Here, he's done both of the Gorn shows from season 1, right? Memento Mori and All Those Who Wander. Then earlier this season, he had Among the Lotus Eaters. And now he's turned out this thought-provoking gem. And the director, Jeff W. Bird, this is his first Strange New Worlds. He did do the penultimate 4th season disco version. That was his first time with Star Trek, Rosetta. But he's had a whole career. Started in the 90s on music videos. He's done Yellow Jackets, The Flash, Nancy Drew, Dynasty, and a lot more. Excellent, excellent job. Look, they're doing war scenes, and you're stretching the budget. Go back and talk to DS9 in the 90s, trying to do the Siege of AR-558, trying to do human combat stories. Now, look, I've always wondered about doing ground-based stories when you're in a science fiction universe and you mainly think about the ship-to-ship fighting. Why does anybody deal with ground-based planets? Well, AR-558 DS9 was great. There was a relay station on the planet that had to be defended, attacked, defended, and it created that. You had the forward, actually the mobile hospital in Nor the Battle to the Strong on DS9. That was a chance to do some combat too, but the effects of the over effects of combat. AR-558 was one of the few times, if any, that we actually got into nitty-gritty World War II Vietnam style war footage on a personal human level. Of course, you can always tell the life and death gritty stories in your face. It's not about pushing dots around on a chart and big ships firing each other. It's very human. It's the appeal of that. It's just always struck me, you've really got to go there to be able to explain that in a universe where you've got big ships shooting at each other. which looks glorious on a screen, but it's not as human as what we've got here or what we've done in the past in other Treks. So kudos to both Jeff and Davey for pulling this off. And of course, all the crews that are in support. It's hard to do on a series budget, especially. This is cinematic TV, I know, but having that combat area, and it was a hospital, but having the edges, having the AR wall in support of a military battle, maybe for the first time, and those tracer bullets, tracer phasers, having that adapted to what a ground-based battle would look like, and where it's not looking so scruffy, where you've got enough extras to fill out the scene, where you've got enough scene to fill out the scene that you've afforded on your budget. And helps having everything in the dark. They pull it off. Kudos to the entire production team for doing one of the hardest type of shows to pull off formats on a weekly budget, or at least what streaming weekly it looks like. Okay, little things, big things. And right off the bat, rattling off all those treaties and names of accords and things that the ambassador was responsible for, right off the bat, we get the Perez Accords. So good on you, writer man. And right off the bat, we get this very cool, maybe a new ship design, this mono-nacelled kind of slender ship, the USS Kelsey May, which, after I ask, Davey tells me on the side was the name, well, it was meant to be homage, a memorial homage to someone in the crew who had passed away over the year from season 1 to season 2. We also get shuttlecraft 12648, which has some kind of a name on the front. Can't make it out yet. Looks like it's off of the NCC 1901, maybe the 7901. I'm sure that'll come out later. But again, this is sometime in the Klingon War, so we're 2 to 3 years before the time period of the contemporary show. So we're in 56, 50. It's never tied down if this is late in the war or early in the war. And since late in the war, the Klingons were on the rampage, I'm going to say this was in those first few months when Discovery actually bothered to get into some of the Klingon War battles before the Terran Empire took over the narrative. So I'm going to say more on the 56 side, early 57. But still, this is only events that were 2 to 3 years earlier than what we're seeing in our Strange New World episode now. Okay, one of the coolest things, the bar synthesizer joke. And yes, thank you for having it be a synthesizer, not a replicator, although it was looking very padsy there, not through the slot. But did you notice the sound effect? Not only was the sound effect of the original series synthesizers, wall slots, but it was the synthesizer sound of the K7 bartender's drink machine when it delivered drinks. So very cool. The sound team came out better than poor Spock. Also, it was great to see a sonic shower, all 4 sides for once. That was cool. Did you notice the Phoenix artwork on Pike's wall in his ready room? Also, datapad. Maybe this was the first time used. You know, we wind up calling it a pad. Original series called it the electronic clipboard in their 60s way. Datapad feels like a nice in-between to not be 24th century about it. Although they're looking more and more streamlined 24th century. But I loved the term use. And then there's a Klingon atrocity on Lambada 5. That harks back to, apparently, the Lambada cluster, which was not the Dominion War, but the Klingon War, remember? Gowron's misadvised, 6-month adventure taking the station or trying to. The Lambada cluster was the site of the loss to a Klingon attack of the USS Farragut. Now, that's the TNG era Farragut, the same Farragut that rescued the D crew off of Viridian 3 at the end of Generations. It was in wartime and was just reported to have been lost to a Klingon attack in the Lambada cluster. So apparently, the Lambada star, with at least 5 planets, where this atrocity happened in this time, 100 years before that Klingon War. This Klingon War, it was a site of a battle atrocity. Apparently, it's the only star with planets. Maybe it's the only star with Class M planets. But it gives its name to the namesake cluster of other stars, too, that we picked up from that Klingon War reference, 4th season of DS9, a century later, 120 years later. Oh, and it's cool to hear that New Angeles is a city on the moon as well. It's the same naming convention, apparently, as New Berlin, which is established as a big base on the moon. It's also fun to hear somebody formally refer to Earth's moon as Terra Luna. Luna is the proper name, and then to have that rejoinder, we just still call it the moon. Our moon, in fact. Oh, and did you notice? Mbenga says Klingon. He says Klingon, just like, well, William Campbell and others early in the original series before everything kind of slurred into Klingon. But you get the feeling that Klingon was, after the namesake from the LA Police Department that Gene Roddenberry worked with in the 50s, was intended to be the original pronunciation. It's kind of like Dak'Rah and Batleth 100 years later, or 20. Did you notice when the ambassador came in to have the dermal regeneration treatment, it was a regular uniformed nurse? She was in regular powder blue, Starfleet blue, not the white outfit that Chapel wears and that you see other medical technicians and other medical people in sickbay using. This was an actual nurse in her actual dress blues for a female uniform. Made me realize I don't see them that often. Anar existentialism. I can see the college classes springing up now. Anar, of course, were Hemmers subspecies of Andorians from the ice moon innards. Go watch your Enterprise again. Delton Parsley, as in our bald-headed friends, right? Ilea from the motion picture, which, remember, is only 20 years away. That's interesting. Not only is it, well, was it a cute joke for the moment, and it was pink, but it establishes that the Deltons were very much in the cultural circle of things, and that the Deltons were hardly a new species by the time of, well, the motion picture is just 12 years later. Oh, and what does that synthesizer bring us? First contact with Raktajino. Okay, native Raktajino, not traded Raktajino, but Raktajino on a Federation ship. There's history there. You know, I don't usually remember individual lines, but when I do for various reasons. And I think it's a good face, the moment between Mbenga and Ortegas. I think it's a good face. Needs to be the next great meme. Just saying. We now know that the superfighter green juice that Mbenga and Chapel digested earlier in the year is dubbed Protocol 12. And it's his concoction. And it's off the books. And does that mean that he went through 11 protocols before he came up with just the mix of adrenaline and who knows what else to get to what he wanted? I mean, it feels like M1 through M4. It feels like the lore and the other, it feels like B4 of the Soong androids. It feels like Data's earlier feline supplements for Spot in the eternal quest for protection. Protocol 12. Of course, remain Klingon and that Klingon phrase go back all the way to the pilot of Discovery and to Kubma's war cry. And the fact that I'm saying the phrase all the way back to the pilot of Discovery is really scary. I mean, really, 6 years, 7 years? In a way, it does feel like decades. Oh, and can I just say, on the tech head front, keeping a body in suspension in the transporter buffer, I mean, it's hardly new, right? In 35 more years or so, Scotty's going to do it to save himself, and we'll pick it up later in Relics on TNG 100 years later. But even on DS9, keeping the DS9 command crew in buffer, it was Rom's plan. It was, our man Bashir. It was the comedy entry into a new kind of hologram, holosuite disaster. So it's nothing new, but I've never thought about it being used in a case like this. It was an ingenious use of no resources, forget limited resources, 0 resources in a way to try to save someone, which makes it all the more poignant. I feel like I've seen so many red shirt deaths. Yeah, a lot of them pointless and needless, and a lot of them not even commemorated. But why was Alvarado's wipeout? It was the cleanest and yet one of the most poignant deaths I can ever remember in a Star Trek. I mean, of all the red shirt deaths I have encountered, his was the most detached and clean and and heart-wrenching all the same. Okay, I have questions. So we recently learned that apparently this era uses the TS-120 tricorder. Kirk's time is probably the TS-122 tricorder. Apparently, one of the other reforms of the T-122 is they come with a strap. I kept watching everybody clump around with a handheld tricorder, thinking, where's the strap? Where's the strap? Free up those hands in that medical field hospital emergency room. Free up those hands. It's such a high-tech answer, the tricorder strap. And talk about the subtext of things. This just flies right by. It's almost like verbal contextual character wallpaper. Let's just think about this for a second. The Klingon free trade agreement, okay, that Ra negotiated, we're talking in just 2 years. We're talking about just 2 years between the end of the war and that present day. He's done that and everything else that was listed. But the bigger question is, where did it go? I'm going to get back to that. Let's hit some of these characters. Now, of course, one of the things that makes you smile, should make any Star Trek fan smile of any era, is seeing Clint Howard in the guest cast. And it made me stop and think, now, with this appearance, what? Clint has been in every iteration of Star Trek except Next Gen, Voyager, and Picard. And now this appearance. And this may be the best and most fun one since Baylock, back when he was 6 years old in 1966. But of course, this episode, as far as the guest lineup goes, is all about Ambassador, former General Dak'Rah, played by Robert Wisdom, who I was assuming was going to be a Canadian actor. Actually, he had 2 storied seasons on The Wire as Bunny Colvin. He's been lately in the cast of Barry. He was a recurring character on Supernatural. He does great with this. He's had a long storied career. I really enjoyed the fact that he had a cane. Might have been the actor's need, but also it lent so much texture to the character, who just 2-3 years ago was a mighty general, and to show how far he'd come. By the way, he's wearing a tattoo. Have we ever seen a Klingon with a tattoo? It's almost Maori. Have we seen a Klingon with a tattoo? We've seen Romulans. We've seen lots of folks with it. I almost wonder if it's part of his, if that's meant to be part of his break with the mainstream of his culture. That's meant to be a little bit of his radicalism, his rebellion, or at least his perceived rebellion for the outside world to see. Yeah, he uses a cane, and he still engages in Makbara, which of course was the Klingon martial arts that Worf employed Dan Curry, who was visual effects, but also a weapons expert, back in the Next Gen days, came up with the Makbara for Michael Dorn and worked on it with him. Kind of a Klingon Tai Chi, actually, in the original. Something else to go along with the Batleth that Dan Curry developed as well. But of course, when these two get going at it, when Mbenga and Ra get going, and it turns into this kind of sloppy thing in the gym there with a very skinny mat, may I add. I don't think that's classical clean Makbara. It's whatever this mess has devolved into. And of course, that's part of the story as well. And if the idea of a Klingon as a Federation ambassador seems odd, well, this guy Ra, he does have a unique biography, to be sure, but let's not forget, it's a century later, but Kalar, who's got mixed human and Klingon heritage, she embraces her Klingon side until she's disgusted by it at times, but she embraces her Klingon identity as she pursues being a Federation ambassador. And of course, Federation-Klingon relations are one of her key areas. But again, it is 100 years later. The Khitomer Accords have been in place. And what Ra is doing here, the ambassador, is really unique. And he does have a list of accomplishments to show that is sincere about what he's doing now. It was really interesting to see Lieutenant Trask here, Va'an Trask, the Andorian. The actor is Kyle Gatehouse, who'd been on The Expanse a few times. Trask, though, to me, harks back to Shran being a special ops, right? And hey, what Andorian doesn't look good in black? Now, this is the kind of story that has lots of guest characters. If you're checking the guest credits, much less watching the episode, You've got Polk as the pilot there, Alvarado and Inman as two of the casualties of the battle there, different ways. In fact, Ensign Inman here is Davy's thank you to his friend, up-and-coming writer Jason Inman. Yeah, you know him as co-host on Geek History Lesson. He produced the Red Shirt Diaries. He's up-and-coming writer, but in this case, it was a thank you for contributing his, well, memories, consulting on what it was like to be in combat based on his own time in the Army. Harper is a fellow combat nurse we see just for a moment. There's a lot of small parts here. I suspect a lot of these names are coming from personal stories, personal background folks that Davy Perez wants to homage. I've just got that vibe about it. There were a couple more, though. There was a lead pilot, if you check the credits, apparently was cut. There was Jix, a character, Saida Ali and Carolyn Doss were cut or trimmed down considerably. I'm guessing they're still contractually bound to have a credit. We also even get about 2 seconds of Jenna Mitchell, who's normally up at the navigation station. Just a couple of seconds, played by Ring Fu. It feels like there were scenes that were majorly cut down for some reason or another. It'll be interesting as we get into the history of this episode to see exactly what that was all about. And of our Strange New Worlds friends, this is another one where Ortegas is really put through the ringer. She was just a couple of episodes ago, right? Lost in translation. It's almost like it's her own O'Brien kind of form of, residual PTSD here, the way he is with Setlick 3. I'm just hoping that this doesn't turn into a Ortegas must suffer trope. But I feel like on Strange New Worlds, they're putting everybody through the ringer. It's like everyone has had their Picard to be hoisted by. Did I say Picard? Their petard. Something in their character, in their history is there to be triggered. And it's like nobody in this cast has escaped it, which is amazing to consider how this is the show that's harkening back to the original series. This is not a drama loop. We've got comedies. We've got courtroom dramas. This is the show that people are hailing as handling all the classical formats of Star Trek, even a musical to come. And yet we've got that part of the DNA of all the characters. But Ortegas, far from the happy-go-lucky quipster at the helm, is really coming along and being developed the way people were begging to have it be done after the first season. And I think she's more than caught up with everybody else's backstory development. Sad to say, in this case. And amazingly, she's got so much screen time in this episode, but Chapel almost feels like the everyman in this case. And it feels like all the great war stories have that character. This is her. She's almost the innocent dropped in. She's far from innocent. She does her job. She's just a sponge, taking it all in. She's the kind that's going to reflect and utilize all of this down the line, and we know that she does. She just seems like the sponge of this episode. And I am not saying that she's just a bystander, not part of the action. She clearly is. But I feel like she's just taking it all in, rolling with the tragedy, rolling with the unexpected, and just observing everything around her for future use. And as we see, she winds up working with Mbenga again. Makes me want to go back and watch the pilot just to see what the vibe is between them now. She's not just the fresh-faced civilian nurse checking a board to help with her pet project or two. It also makes me want to layer in now as much as I can when Majel's Chapel is proceeding through the life she has later on. How many encounters with life and death close up that way does Majel's Chapel have? Even to the point of running disaster services and relief during the whale probe attack on Earth in Star Trek IV. It makes you think. Freshens all the Star Treks all the time. And if it's not so raw, then why? Gang, it's texture, not trivia. Whatever you can make of it, it's there. Now it's your job, it's your opportunity to take it and run with it. But yeah, Chapel just takes and she files it away. And for maybe his poignant part of the episode, Spock has a "I just want to help," which sounds so much like, well, "Let me help" from that future Orion author that gets quoted in City on the Edge of Forever. But most of all, this is M'Benga's episode. And it's amazing that we've been having M'Benga moments, right, all the way through. We've been loading up with this PTSD, the fact that he had a prior combat history, all of this that was not apparent in the first season, and was some tweaking going on between season 1 and season 2. But look, simple things. Thanks to the sticker on his Starfleet footlocker, is that what that is? We know he's a full commander. He's not even a lieutenant commander. Now, we don't get rank in the original series, but McCoy is a lieutenant commander and is the CMO at that time. Is M'Benga still a commander and he's just working on staff for some reason? Texture, not trivia. Does he get a grade reduction? Does something happen? This is why I say I can't wait to see how we fill out. What is the journey between 2259 and 2266 and 67? I can't wait for that. But even more than his rank, we're learning so much about M'Benga here. We get his biofile with his parents, Gichinga and Wangera, and his siblings, Nicholas, Sikudani, and Niawira Okambo. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing right, but we know he's got 3 siblings, as well as his parents, all great backstory. But from dialogue, we find out that he had the most hand-to-hand kills of the Klingon War. Talk about retconning big time. I mean, look, that Dak'Rah dagger had a lot of mileage on it. And by mileage, I mean blood. Especially when you consider that obviously it was Trask's, trophy of victory. He took it off a dead Klingon, and then in turn, M'Benga took it from him. When he decided to go off and finish the job himself, at least. I mean, let's just stop and take stock here. From the doctor who went fishing when we first met him, Henry Blake style, another MASH allusion. No, and was concerned chiefly in season 1 about the health and tracking the sickness of his daughter using that pattern buffer trick. To what we have now, that definitely was a season 1 to season 2 change, but oh my gosh, we've never had a doctor with this much of a reveal. Now, yes, we had the EMH take off down his command track. We had the EMH doctor in Voyager going off being a spy through the transporter. And most of all, we had a huge reveal with Dr. Bashir, where you find out 2/3 of the way through the run of the series that he was genetically engineered. And now he's propelled into battling wits with Section 31 and standing up to them, even as he's avoiding manipulation in the depths of the Dominion War. But forgive me for my language, but those all seemed a little clean-handed. They were not, forget dirty, they were not as bloody as where M'Benga's been. I mean, look, McCoy went into Starfleet as personal therapy to get away from a divorce. Yes, that's prime. M'Benga has done a complete 180. It's like a personal reformation to undo his career as a full-on Black Ops soldier, going into medicine after he'd started a career path down that track and encountered what happened. Had he not studied any medicine between the Klingon War in just the last couple years? Surely he didn't crash course his way through med school. It's really something that's going to be worked out now in the future. Now I'm torn. Clearly, he has dived into his medical career, not just to run away or escape something in his life, but to morally redeem himself. I mean, to get away from his Jason Bourne roots, basically. Does that sound like someone else we've just met? What a mirror between M'Benga and Ra. Ambassador Ra, General Dak'Rah. In one way, maybe that's how he could extend as much empathy to General Dak'Rah reformed as he could. Up until the point where he could not stand to let Ra continue to live his big lie, because that would totally undercut any self-reformation, the sincerity of that was going to happen. But once again, let's step back. Let's get the big picture. We've had this personal drama between these two men flare up. The result of the last few years, the result of one fateful crossing of paths that night on the moon of Jabal. But look at the big picture here. There's no doubt, as everyone in the crew is regretfully reciting, that Ambassador Ra has sincerely plunged into this life. He's a Klingon defector to the Federation, and yet he can deal with the Federation to accomplish all these things. The Klingon Free Trade Agreement, the Perez Accords. Go down the list of all the cool place names that get invoked. He's clearly done that. Here's what I wonder. What happened? Due to the karma of honesty, did whatever happened, and it's an enigma. It's an enigma worthy of, as I said, Private Little War. It's an enigma worthy of Sisko's mood at the end of Pale Moonlight. Whatever happened behind that hazy sheet, which the director has talked about being meant for you to decide. They're going to be coy. They shot it several ways. They present it one way. That's the way that's canon now. It's enigmatic. Did M'Benga plunge the knife? Was it an accident? Who did what? He does say, oh no, don't do it. M'Benga does. But whatever happens, the bottom line is Ra is out of the picture. Was he truly making progress on somehow? And remember, L'Rell is the Chancellor now. I can't wait to see some Strange New Worlds invoke what's going on with the Klingons at the high level. Because what I'm dreading seeing, I'd love to see it at the same time dread it, is what's going on with the Klingons with L'Rell as Chancellor. Is her chancellorship still on as shakier ground as we left it back in Discovery Season 2 when we last saw her in power? Because, kiddos, there's going to be a complete sea change. Just, again, by the first season of the original series, which is only about 7 years away here in real time, in real Star Trek time, what happens? Is the loss of Ra here, even if somehow kind of a moral equivalence here, even if it's somehow a karmic necessity, does it doom any chance of real détente at this time between the Klingons and the Federation? Because if he's gone, what happens to things like free trade agreements and accords? Those all sound like words that mean nothing by the time we get to the tension around Organia, by the time we see the events of Errand of Mercy, by the time we see the Cold War envelop for the next couple of decades. And it doesn't end until the events of Star Trek VI and the Praxis explosion and the Klingons basically on their knees, and even yet a conspiracy trying to maintain that Cold War. Until we get to the Khitomer Accords in what, 20 years? Until we get that far along, was that a track that was put in place that was destined to happen once this one lone Klingon left the picture? Was he truly an icon? Was he truly one of a kind who was accomplishing these things on his own with no backup to step in when he was out of the picture? It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I feel like this may be one of those great unexamined but potentially fascinating texture feels to look at what's going on with the Klingon Empire. Could we really have swung so fast between those nomadic houses scattered like the Arab tribes before the First World War, who were unified by, of all people, Lawrence of Arabia? Did T'Kuvma's movement, which is cut down by his death, but still reinforced by all-out war, only to be squashed by L'Rell's solving of the war end and peace? Are we into a place where the pendulum is sweeping back and forth so fast that there's no time to settle? Do we really go from T'Kuvma's nationalism to L'Rell's at least savvy outward expansion and ability to make Federation at least agreements? And then what happens to her? I'm thinking that between these several events here that we're swinging back hard to what was driving Takuvma, even if they are using augment soldiers to encounter Federation folk. And then we're on the path to Kittimer. Was Kittimer delayed by 30 years because of what we've just watching right now? I really hope someone on Strange New Worlds has realized this and seized it, and not that we need any more Klingon stories when we've got so many other places we could explore, but it's a fascinating bigger picture that Strange New Worlds can contribute. Discovery set it up. I've been waiting to see what happens with L'Rell, because I don't think she is the Chancellor in charge by the time we get to Errand of Mercy. And I feel for her. I'm feeling for Mary Chivo, but I would love to see her get the chance, and that character gets a chance to write the history of what's going on with the Klingons in a way that we never guessed had been happening when we first all saw our own first-time viewings of Errand of Mercy and Kor and Koloth and Kang and all the rest. But in any case, what an episode from Benga. What an episode for Chapel. What an episode for the big picture of Star Trek. And if nothing else, it's getting easier and easier to see the clouds. They're going to detour the straight line paths for both of those characters, Chapel and Mbenga, before we think we meet them in the original series. And I, for one, can't wait for that textureful ride. Oh, last thing. I've seen people arguing online about the moon of Jagal. Now, I took it as it's a moon that nobody knows the name of, but it's orbiting the planet of Jagal. It's the moon of Jagal. Other people are saying, oh, no, what do you mean? It's the moon of Jagal. It's like the moon of Endor. I took a chance. I asked Davey Perez online, and he said no. He was, being poetical. And yes, it is the moon of Jagal. Jagal is the name of the moon. I guess someday we'll figure out the name of the planet it orbits. Well, okay, maybe that's a good place to stop. Maybe this is where I sign off on this second opinion. But what about you? You know, when I waded into this episode, I had no idea where it was going to go, much less where the big picture that I was conjuring up was going to go. But what do you think? What do you think about these amazing performances, this amazing story, and yeah, the big picture of what's going on here? Potentially. Hey, you can always leave a comment below, right? And like and subscribe while you're at it too. Please boost the signal. Hey, I dare you to subscribe for some sanity in Star Trek, okay? Most of all, if you appreciate Dr. Trek's opinion, his viewpoint, my viewpoint, I invite you to take a look at everything we're doing. My podcasts, my live streams, our experiences, like the Trekland Treks Day Tours, our weekly show, our live stream, Trekland Tuesdays Live, and yes, Portal 47, the backstage package. Get yourself closer to all things Trekland, including the Trek Files podcast from Roddenberry every week. Yes, it's all there. Check it out at LarryNemecek.com. Trek well, everybody.